All right, welcome everyone to our Humane Hoax Online Conference. We are excited to get started, and today we're going to be focusing in on the book, The Humane Hoax, that I edited, that is surrounding our whole project, our Humane Hoax Project. And we're going to be getting into that, deep into some of the chapters with some of the amazing contributing authors. There's 18 contributing authors to this anthology. And we're going to dig into this book today. Alastor Van Kleeck is the co-founder of the Humane Hoax Project, and he's going to be joining me in this first hour. We're just going to kind of unpack the book and talk about the Humane Hoax and why this is such a critical issue. So I'm just going to kind of get started with kind of why I decided to write this book and I edited this book. I wrote the introduction, the conclusion, and a chapter, but really it's an incredible collaborative effort of so many wonderful voices, and we're going to hear from some of them today. But I've been researching this issue that I call the humane hoax. Others have called it the humane myth and humane washing for about 20 years now. I wrote the first book on the issue of humane washing called The Ultimate Betrayal. That was my first book 10 years ago. I can't believe it's been 10 years. It takes me 10 years to get another book out. And, you know, these issues, this is really something new. This is our 21st century, I believe, 21st century activist challenge. Because back in the 90s, the 2000s, we didn't see these labels. We didn't see this stuff. There were labels like fresh or young, things like that. But the labels that we're seeing today, this is something new. And this is, I saw this progression starting to happen back in the 2000s, and I was concerned about it. I felt that this could be a possible detriment, possible roadblock to our goal of animal liberation from the exploitation of farming. And I was concerned that these labels could lull consumers into this kind of false sense of industry improvement. So we're going to talk about that. But so what started happening, of course, is we were seeing these labels and just, cage-free, free range, certified humane, all these labels. And I wrote the first book. And then there started getting more momentum. There was a panel on the Animal Rights National Conference that they called the Humane Hoax. They dubbed that saying, and I liked it. And Alastor and I met on one of those panels. We talked about how this was so important, so critical, really needed more attention. So we started the Humane Hoax Project. And about 2018, I started collecting essays for this anthology. It's been a long time, it was a long process. The pandemic put publishing back, so it took some time to get it out, but it's out now finally. There's amazing voices in this book, authors, activists, academics, rescuers, sanctuary workers, all coming at this issue from very different angles. And I really want to thank Lantern Publishing for believing in this book, for publishing and supporting this project. So the book was #1 on Amazon for the first week that it was out. So that's really amazing. It was Amazon's animal rights section, animal rights category for new releases. It was #1 in that category for new releases. So that was cool. Okay, so let's just do a quick definition. What is the humane hoax? It's a mindset that there's a wide range of better ways to breed and slaughter animals, right? To produce products. It conveys this false sense of some industry improvement, either ethically or environmentally, of course, humane washing and greenwashing. And so I broke it down in the book into 4 sections. And the first section in the book is humane washing. And in that section, there's some really amazing chapters in that section. Alastor's chapter is in that part, and so is mine. And this is where I wanted to really try to feature some of the individuals that are affected by this, some of the victims that are actually affected by the Humane Hoax. So we have stories of individual animals in this first part to really bring people in, tell stories, tell their stories, and show that this is an issue beyond just, you know, labels. But this is something that I feel is really important, that I really want people to understand, that I want everyone to really grasp. There's been some criticism of the book and of the Humane Hoax Project, you know, a larger, the larger project. The criticism goes something like, well, why are you focusing in on just a few animals, this small number of animals? You know, what that you need to focus on the 99% of factory farmed animals. And I get into in my chapter about why we shouldn't be using that kind of language. I'm not going to talk about that right now. Please read my chapter to hear about that. But what I do want to say is that, you know, this issue goes way beyond just a few animals. This is part of a systematic problem that we have facing us. You know, so first of all, you know, smaller operations. Okay, so if, you know, if there's a label, and people think that it's a smaller operation, right? But that's not necessarily the case. The big industrial farms with tens of thousands of animals, they are using these labels as well. I go into numerous farms in my introduction, in my chapter, that are using these labels. Butterball Turkey, Tillamook Farms, Fairlife Dairy. I give a lot of examples that undercover investigators have gone in and seen these horrible, horrible conditions, practically unchanged from any conventional farm, and they're using these labels. Okay, so it's not just a small number of small farms. And then, of course, we know that if it is a smaller scale operation, that they're still going to face inherent cruelties that cannot be avoided, you know, to produce a profitable product. They're still going to face, you know, body mutilations, separation of families, slaughter at a young age. These things don't change because of the label. So there's that issue. And then, you know, when it's a small farm, a family farm doesn't necessarily mean, of course, that these animals aren't, you know, going to be living a better life. But here's where it's systematic. Okay, people buy a carton of, you know, cage-free eggs, right? Because they want to do the right thing, they want to help. But then they're going to go buy muffins with conventional eggs in it, or go and, you know, buy whatever at the restaurant. They're going to get a meal with eggs. They're identifying still as an egg eater. And the industry knows this. They're banking on this. They want people to feel better, right, about buying these products. And so they want us to continue being meat eaters, egg eaters. So these humane labels benefits the entire industry. It keeps the industry going. Okay, it is insidious, and I feel, and manipulative. And, you know, it makes people feel better and believe that there's some industry-wide improvement when there really is not. And, you know, having these products with some humane labels, it's a false sense of security. It creates a complacency around all animal products, and it's just continuing the industry, continuing the sales. So anyway, I just go on and on, but I know time is ticking, so we probably should move on. I did want to talk really, really briefly about the cage-free label, and just to remember that these things, you know, it gets funneled down to like one issue, the size of their confinement, and then when they buy the cage-free label, it's like that all, you know, these birds are living a great life and they're not suffering. As you can see from this image, that is not the case. When you can't just funnel the entirety of the horrors they face from the beginning of their lives to the end, in the horrible, you know, horrifying hatcheries to the slaughterhouse, into one, you know, into two words: cage-free. It creates a complacency, and it's just, you know, misinterpreting misrepresenting the reality of the situation. So that's just in a nutshell. And I will also show you now. I talk about in my chapter a chicken that I rescued, a rooster named Kakuta. And I'm not going to get into the story. You can read the chapter and hear his story. He was beat up by another rooster. They got into a scuffle, and he was in bad shape. And he had been abandoned in a parking lot. I found him in a parking lot of a Walgreens. And this is Kakuta, and I was able to revive him, to care for him. And it was the first time, the only time that I've ever done that. And I know that sanctuary workers get the pleasure of doing this all the time. And it was such an amazing experience to actually be with him, and it was this, I've never ever had this sense of like protection. Like I wanted to keep him safe, protect him, make sure that he lived through the night. I was so scared he was going to die through the night because he was so injured and unresponsive. But he did come back, and I just wanted to show everyone pictures of Kakuta so you could see this handsome man and know him from the images. And now when you read the chapter, you can have the image of him in your mind. And so now, okay, I'm going to, I tried to get a lot in there, and I'm going to send it over to Alastor, and I want Alastor to tell us about his chapter, his amazing chapter in this first section, this humane washing section of the book. And you get to see BB.
Yeah. So yeah, my chapter was really focused on kind of talking about some of the realities of backyard chicken farming, because in the humane hoax, like a lot of people seem to hold up backyard chicken farming as like the best way to have chickens, who are basically pets, quote unquote, but also give you the benefit of eggs and other things. And so since we started our sanctuary back in 2014, the hundreds of chickens that we've rescued, almost all of them have been coming out of backyard chicken situations. And BB really like a good eye-opening example of that for us back in the fall of 2014. And I've told her story many times, so I won't spend too much time on the details of it. I know we have a lot to get to today. But basically she was living in somebody's backyard in like a small chicken tractor. A raccoon broke in one night, killed her 3 sisters, and seriously injured BB. And when she came to our sanctuary, she was basically like shell shocked. She barely moved, didn't want to eat. She was very stressed out and traumatized. And after that, like with care and finding a new community with the other hens who lived here, she really came alive and came out of her shell and was a very happy hen. It was fascinating to me because we were exposed to so many individual aspects of backyard chicken farming just in BB's story, and that's why I kind of use her as a launching point to talk about all the realities of backyard chicken farming, which include the fact that for every hen in a backyard, there's a rooster who was either killed or abandoned, most likely, because chickens hatch roughly equal numbers of hens and roosters, but nobody ever sees the roosters because they're usually killed as chicks or once they reach sexual maturity. So BB had 8 brothers from the 12 eggs that were hatched, and those 8 roosters went back to the farm where the eggs came from, where they would have been slaughtered. And so that's kind of the reality, whether you're talking about hatcheries or you're talking about someone's backyard or a farm. It's a kind of a similar situation. So I talk about the roosters. I talk about problems with the medical complications that resulted from years and years and millennia of domesticating chickens for the purpose of food production, as well as kind of other examples of situations where backyard chicken keeping isn't the utopia and the bucolic sanctuary space that backyard chicken farmers like to pretend that it is. And so, really, though, I think for me, one of the most, important reminders that BB's story shows us is that when it comes to the sanctuary side of things, almost all sanctuaries are encountering animals coming from these so-called humane farming situations, whether it's backyards or kind of small family farms, things like that. Like those are the places that are dumping animals or trying to surrender animals to sanctuaries. So sanctuaries get calls, dozens of calls a week asking to take in animals, and they're almost always coming from these small situations. So when vegans like to promote sanctuaries as these wonderful places for animals as an alternative to farming, it's important to keep in mind that those animals from sanctuaries, most of them are going to be coming from humane, quote unquote, farms, and these small farms. So you're seeing the survivors of these farms when you follow sanctuaries. For us, it's almost all of our animals are coming from these types of farms. So just something to keep in mind that I don't know that I always point out super well with the Humane Hoax, but it's important that, as far as the sanctuary side of things go, like that's the majority of the cases that we're dealing with.
I was trying to unmute. It wasn't letting me. All right. Great points, Alastor. And it's so interesting how even after the book, there's all these points that come up. I'm like, oh, I wish we had said that. And I wish we had said that. There's just so much to it. This issue is huge. But yeah. So we'll just wrap up the humane washing section, because that's the first, again, the first part of the book is the humane washing section. And I'm going to wrap it up here with Alastor's, a quote from Alastor's chapter: "How humane can something be when individual lives are measured in dollars and cents, and when a culture of ignorance and neglect is accepted as the standard?" Really wonderful quotes throughout this book and in Alastor's chapter. And, so just kind of wrapping up the humane hoax, or the humane washing section. Again, just keeping in mind that that this is a systematic problem. This affects all animals. It's not just a small number of animals. It's not just animals coming from the small farms. It's when people believe this, when people think that there is this kind and compassionate way to commodify and kill animals, then they are going to continue being meat eaters, or can continue being egg and dairy consumers. And there is no way to, as we know, to humanely commodify and kill animals. So this affects all animals systematically. It's not just affecting a few animals. So, okay. And another chapter from this section is the one that's called A Pig Called Silver, Ingrid Taylor's chapter, and she'll be up at the end of the conference to tell us about silver. So there were some wonderful stories of individual animals in this, individual beings in this first part. Okay, so the second part of the book is greenwashing. I did want to, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I did want to touch on it. And, I had another criticism of the book, that we need to stick to data, someone said. And I'm not exactly sure what they meant, but what I will point out is that there are pages and pages and pages of endnotes that are citing studies, peer-reviewed scientific studies, and a lot of them, the majority of them, are coming from this section, the greenwashing section. So there is a lot of data in this book. We are sticking to the data. And this, this is, of course, a huge issue. We are facing a cataclysmic situation with our planet, with global warming. And, of course, no matter how you are raising animals, it wastes tons of resources, water, pollution, topsoil erosion, all of that. And we get into all of that with these wonderful chapters in the book, some amazing ecologists and deep researchers doing the chapters in this section. And what I'll just touch on here is that in some instances, these we're learning that these labels can be even worse. And grass-fed is one of those one of those chapters, there's studies now coming out of Oxford and Harvard and Washington State that are comparing conventional farming and grass-fed cows and farming, and they're finding again and again that the grass-fed products require more land, more water, are creating more greenhouse gases. I mean, it's just crazy. So, you know, we need to know that this isn't just like, well, maybe it's a little better. Well, no, in some instances it's completely neutral, in others it's even worse. So very, very important to know. Also, we get into regenerative grazing. Oh, this I just had to throw this in. This gives you an example, a wonderful example of greenwashing here, grass-fed, and they've got the name of this cow. This is Buttercup. Yeah, Buttercup is long gone. Buttercup is long dead, throat slashed. Just such a, you know, such a manipulative marketing. All right, so but regenerative grazing, this is another one that we talk about and touch on in the book extensively, which is very important. It's really where a lot of the energy, a lot of the eco energy is going. Environmental reform is going into regenerative grazing. I'm not going to get into it here, but this is where I'll give a plug for my podcast, actually, the Hope for the Animals podcast, because I just had one of our authors, Nicholas Carter, on the podcast. And his chapter is in this greenwashing section, and we really unpack regenerative grazing and get into it. And he does a wonderful job of explaining what's going on with this. We've got to keep an eye on this. We've got to learn about this. These are the things that are going to be coming up more and more. Well, we've got regenerative grazing now. What do you say to that? Read the book. You need to know what to say to that, right? I mean, that's why we compiled this information for you. But one last thing I want to say, and I know Alastor had something he wanted to say about greenwashing as well, but something that I learned, and I kind of knew this, but kind of really solidified by reading the chapters, is that something we need to focus on is rewilding. Rewilding, and this is a nature-based solution to the climate crisis. Really, green spaces, you know, the preserving the land, preserving water, preserving topsoil. The best way to do that is to leave it alone. Just leave the area alone. Rewild, regrow, regreening. That nothing sequesters carbon better than green spaces, right? So this is really critical information, and the only way to do this is by reducing the amount of animals that we're raising and using, and eating more plant-based. When you eat more vegan, we're freeing up land. We're freeing up land to be able to rewild, because what is, and you know, what's so interesting is that what's gotten us to this place of, you know, everything being really degraded and deforested and the land just being terrible, grazing, right? We know that. What is the proposed solution? More grazing, regenerative grazing. You know, it makes no sense. So anyway, this is great stuff to get into. Alastor, did you want to touch on greenwashing?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of personal experience with this. Just, I mean, I've been vegan since, 1999, and one of the things that I got into in the early 2000s was doing more work on environmental issues. And so I was, doing volunteering and other work with places like Nature Conservancy and Sierra Club, and, kind of all these big players in the environmental movement, and nobody wanted to talk about animal agriculture. I mean, I remember giving some talks about the issues, the environmental impacts of animal agriculture on the planet, and in so many different aspects of it. And it was just crickets. And that was like one of the big reasons why I kind of moved away from doing stuff like activism focused on environmental, just because I was so frustrated with how little interest there was and awareness there was, in these environmental movements and stuff. And so it's interesting to see them try to take it on, but in a way that's counterproductive because it's, you know, continuing to prop up animal agriculture and not actually addressing the kind of the root of the problem, which is the fact that we exploit animals for food.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Um, hmm. So that's the greenwashing section of the book. Some really, really powerful chapters in the greenwashing section of the book. The third part of the book is called Language and Labels. And this section, you know, this has some really, really powerful chapters as well. Karen Davis's chapter is in this section, as well as Joanne Kong. Devanatha Nair does a wonderful chapter. Nair actually is how you pronounce her last name, I believe. And you know, it's a really powerful chapter. And this is where, you know, again, talking about that systematic issue, you know, that how this is affecting all farming and all animals is we're seeing these labels more and more, and you know, it's permeating the industry. And actually, I have it actually right here in my introduction that it's estimated that this was a study in 2017, so I don't know if it might have shifted a little bit by now, but they thought that in that study they estimated that cage-free eggs would be 71% of the market by 2026. So, you know, so this is not just in the back corners of health food stores anymore. This is getting to be everywhere you go. You're seeing these labels in regular grocery stores, at the coffee shop, whatever. So this is really, really starting to permeate, and we've got to keep an eye on this, because I believe that it really lulls people into thinking that there's improvement across the board when there's not. So Alastor, did you want to get us started in this section and talk about kind of languages and labels?
Yeah,
yeah,
sure. Yeah, I think you have a slide up. The next slide is the
yeah.
veal one?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, not to make this Alistair story time, but yeah, no, the happy veal thing is such a frustrating issue for me. I remember back in it was like 2010, 2011. I was working at a local farmers market because I was very interested in like local foods and kind of supporting local food systems as a way to kind of, you know, address the harms of agriculture. And I remember my final straw for working there was when one of the vendors, who was a dairy there, put out a sign that said, "We now sell happy veal," and I was just like, "Nope, I'm done. I'm out. I can't do it." But it's that same sort of like twisted mentality where, you know, it's like trying to draw a fake line between like the real bad stuff, but we're doing the good stuff. And since our stuff is the good stuff, you don't really have to think too much about it being really actually the bad stuff. And so, I mean, to me, something like humane veal or happy veal is such a, I mean, it's such a blatantly obvious contradiction in terms, but you know, it's one of those labels that if you don't think about it too much, it's like, oh, okay, they're happy baby cows who are being confined and slaughtered. You know, it doesn't make any sense. So, you know, the language and the label stuff, it's so fascinating how effective it is, even though it's on its face, it seems like it's fairly obvious that there's something wrong here, if you know anything about animal farming. And so, yeah, there were so many good chapters in the third part of the book, and you know, like Karen's chapter is in there on eggs and chicken farming and stuff. And so, you know, it's something that I feel very strongly is a big issue for us to tackle, and we can't talk too much about the reality behind these labels for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so manipulative, and just, you know, we almost had eradicated veal. Like veal had become very, you know, very taboo and very, you know, like, oh, well, so many people would say, well, I don't eat veal, but I eat anything else, right? Because they knew that they were a baby, that they knew they were a young calf. And now veal's making a comeback, it looks like, because we're able to say, but they were treated humanely, right? And what people don't realize is that all of these animals are slaughtered as babies. They're all babies. They're all very young. hardly any animal sees their first birthday. It's usually they're slaughtered within weeks or months of life for flesh. So, it's very, very, very frustrating that now, even though this is the one where people did recognize that it was a baby and did recognize that there was something very, very, kind of above and beyond cruel about slaughtering a baby, now they've got a way to feel good about it and to feel okay about it. And the industry and the marketers are allowing that. And it's so frustrating. So I'm going to just talk about a couple of labels that I've seen around that I found interesting. So this was a chocolate bar with grass-fed milk chocolate that I saw recently. And, what is it that the producers want us to think, right, about this product? Do you think they want us to believe that the cows were happier, that it was more environmental, maybe it's healthier? Well, I think that's all implied, right? That's what they want us to believe, that there's all these improvements happening. But what's the reality here? Grass-fed. It means that the cows ate grass for some portion of their life. That's it. That is the only thing that's really going on here. So all these other stories that are being told, it's just marketing. It has no basis in reality. And these animals are still, separated. Their families are separated. Their babies are taken away. Their bodies are manipulated. They are genetically manipulated so much that their bodies are in pain often. And, and then they go to this very brutal slaughter at such a young age. So all these stories that these labels tell, and it's just two words, grass-fed. But then all of this narrative starts happening, right, around these just two words. Okay, this next one really just was horrible. Responsibly raised and unconditionally loved. So this is some real kind of weird psychology going on here. Okay, so responsibly raised, first of all, and we're seeing this a lot with Chipotle's and Whole Foods are using this responsibly raised. And the thing about this is that it's vague enough. It's sufficiently vague that you don't know what they're talking about. What are they talking about? Do they mean ethically? Do they mean environmentally? You don't know. And so people start putting a story to it, right? You see the grassy hill. Oh, okay, so it's better environmentally. Oh, the animals got to be outside, so it's better ethically, right? This is the stories that you start telling yourself just from these two words that you have no idea what they really mean, right? But the marketers are wanting to create this facade. And then this unconditionally loved, oh, oof, it's really, really disturbing, because what are we seeing here? We're seeing a burrito. Okay, so they're not talking about the burrito, right? Of course, they're talking about the animals whose flesh is cut up in this burrito as being unconditionally loved. How can you unconditionally love someone and then cut them up and put them in food? It's wow. Really, really, really weird, disturbing stuff. And it's these stories and this marketing manipulation that is keeping people, I believe, eating meat and eating dairy and eating eggs because they're able to, feel better about it. I truly believe that people want to do the right thing. They do care to an extent, and that's why these labels sell well. But we have to keep the narrative up and explain the truth, expose the truth behind these labels, and explain that really this is, it's a hoax, it's a myth. So just kind of wrapping up this section of language and labels. I'm gonna see what kind of time we are having. Yeah, let's maybe wrapping it up. And actually, Alastor, did you have anything more for this section to say?
No, I don't think I have anything more to say. Yeah.
Okay.
I think you covered it.
All right.
Yeah, no, that section of that section of the book is really like interesting. So I definitely recommend it for people who want to be able to like talk more with other people who aren't in the know about the realities of the labels.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the cool thing about an anthology, right? Is that you don't have to read it just cover to cover. It's not a full story. You can just pick and choose chapters that interest you, things that stand out to you, and be able to just read those chapters. So I love anthologies for that reason. So that's really great. And I will say one more thing about the language and labels section. I hear activists now all the time saying things like, yeah, well, I was doing this outreach and someone said, oh, well, I buy cage-free eggs, or I get my meat at Whole Foods, or whatever, or this place has a humane something, and I think that, we have to really educate ourselves about this. I don't think people as vegans, as advocates, I don't think we know much about it, or really what's the reality is, and how to respond to that. So it's really important that we educate ourselves to learn, about what's truly going on, and how to respond and to help people to unpack and understand. I'll say also that I think that it is really important to, at that point, say, and what I like to do is say, thank you for caring. Thank you so much for being compassionate, and for caring, and for paying more money to, for these products. I appreciate that. Let me tell you the truth behind these labels. Let me tell you the truth about that label. Let me tell you what these birds really go through, that kind of thing. So showing that this, it's good they care, but the reality is so important to know. So anyway, okay. So, yes. So just wrapping up the language and labels section of the book. This is a quote from one of the chapters by Devata Nair, I believe is how you pronounce her last name. Redefining terms to imply that the humane treatment of animals is possible within the framework of animal agriculture, known as humanewashing, has been instrumental in providing the discourse necessary for the continued exploitation and abuse of animals. And that's what I'm talking about, how it's systematic, how it affects all animals. Because when we, recreate the stories, recreate the narrative, rewrite the stories, redo the websites for this, false narrative, then that's how the industry is able to continue doing what they're doing on the massive scale that they're doing it. So it's, it's a one feeds the other, one supports the other. It's not really separate industries, small scale, large scale. It's very, very connected. All right. Okay, so the fourth part of the book is called Spiritual Dimensions. And it's a small section, but I felt an important part of the book. And this picture is a slaughterhouse in Petaluma, right outside of downtown Petaluma. And I used to live on the road that you drive into Petaluma. I drove by this slaughterhouse for years and years. It used to be called Rancho Veal, was the name of the slaughterhouse. And they got a fresh coat of paint. They were sold to Marin Sun Farms. Fresh coat of paint, and they wrote mindful meats on the side. And I talk about this in my chapter, and just how as a spiritual person, how offensive this was to me, and just having this term be co-opted and appropriated, this term mindful, which comes from the Dharma traditions, and being mindful of your actions towards others. I mean, that's what they're talking about when they say be mindful. And how dare they put this on a slaughterhouse, to think that anything mindful could be happening in a slaughterhouse. I mean, that's how these words get so manipulated, right? So twisted around, that unconditionally loving an animal you're going to kill. It's very bizarre. So anyway, it's an interesting section. There's another interesting chapter that's actually written by my husband, Kojin Bohanec, and he talks about spiritual bypass in DIY slaughter, like do-it-yourself slaughter. They now have classes to show people how to slaughter your own animals, things like that. And they use very spiritual and flowery language around it, like connecting to the animal and sending their spirit out, whatever, all this stuff. And he has a very interesting chapter about how this is actually a psychological um, thing called spiritual bypass, where you use spiritual language and spirituality to justify doing bad things, to justify doing, doing these violent acts, right? So interesting chapters in the spiritual dimension section. Just wanted to mention it, but we're going to move on because time is ticking. And so, all right. So I want to talk about next steps in my next project. It took me 10 years to get my second book out, so I better start now for the next one. I'm going to start now. And my vision for my next project actually is, if you're familiar with Carol Adams, and Carol Adams actually, the amazing, legendary Carol Adams has a chapter in the book. She wrote, of course, The Sexual Politics of Meat long ago, I believe in 1990. And she did a follow-up called The Pornography of Meat, where she had images of animals being sexualized, and then she wrote commentary on those images. I would like to do something similar, as her book being an inspiration, and what I want to do is collect images of the humane hoax out there in the world, and I need your help for it. So I'm hoping that you will be now looking for images of the humane hoax, take high resolution pictures and send them to me, and maybe they'll be in the next book. And these are just two examples here. These are both from Sacramento, California. This over here on the right, that brown sign that says Happy Lamb, and that is actually a restaurant called Happy Lamb, the Happy Lamb. And they have a lot of lamb on the menu. This other one on the left, this was on a barbecue restaurant, and you can see this little pig in there, looking like he's taking a hot tub in the pot. So the images like this is what I'm looking for. So I would love you to help me with that. Be on the lookout for images. And then I also would like to ask you to please be an ambassador of this book. I think books are so powerful. Books are so important. Books are where you can really dig into an issue and really embody and embrace an issue, right? That kind of get very intimate and knowledgeable and dive deep into an issue. And that's why I compiled these essays and edited this book. And I think that getting this into the hands of people is so important. I think it's where they can really embody and make change. So please, please buy the book and read it if you haven't already. And then if you can maybe buy the book for your local library, give it to someone else. If you're able to, please do that. This is another one. Please, please, please write a review on Amazon. That is so helpful. You don't have to buy the book from Amazon. I believe you just have to be an existing customer. So if you can go give the book a 5-star rating and write a review, that bumps up the algorithm and will help the book. So please write a review on Amazon. Tell others about the book. Maybe if you see a book club, a vegan book club, or any book club, suggest it for their book club. Share on social media. There's going to be 4 podcasts of my Hope for the Animals podcast dedicated to the book. We've done some book club book club style talking about the book episodes, as well as some of the authors have been on, and I'm going to be having Lisa Barca on, another author, coming up June 1st. So you can share those episodes. That's super helpful. Share the episodes of my podcast. And you can learn more about our larger project, the Humane Hoax Project, at humanehoax.org. All right. So, of course, the only humane choice is vegan. that's the conclusion we're going to come to. Alastor, do you want to have some final thoughts here while we're wrapping up?
Yeah, just quickly, I'm really excited to be a contributor to this anthology. And I'm amazed at the essays that are in the book. I think it did a good job. You did a good job, Hope, of collecting essays that really kind of cover a broad spectrum of issues around the Humane hoax. And I definitely encourage people to read it and to share it. This is still something that I think a lot of people, vegans included, don't really understand and often don't want to talk about just because it is difficult. But from my perspective, like I've felt ever since we started kind of seeing the realities of all this sort of stuff, that being able to talk about the humane hoax is a really effective way to, kind of cut off a lot of the other like arguments that people are going to make, because you've made the case against the so-called best cases for animal farming. And so I think it's really, really helpful to be informed about this when you're doing activism, because you can steer the conversation in a way that brings people back towards understanding that all animal farming is wrong. And so it's awesome to have another book out there on this topic. Hopefully we'll get more in the future.
Yeah, and I'll just say, as I'm wrapping up, that I really strongly believe that this industry is unreformable. These are reforms that are trying to appease people, but this industry, and we can't expect this industry to self-regulate either. Any more than we could expect the fossil fuel industry to do the right thing and stop drilling for oil. It's not going to happen. Self-regulation doesn't work. This industry is so destructive, so cruel, so damaging, that it's unreformable and needs to be dismantled, and needs to be replaced with healthy plant foods. That is really what needs to happen. And these reforms, I feel, are a distraction from that. And an appeasement of what's happening. So, I feel like we have to, on a grassroots level, do the work that's necessary, do the right thing, which is, of course, living vegan, and standing up and speaking out against all animal farming. And make the changes that's really necessary for our survival. I believe this is really our 21st century challenge. Like I said, this is going to be what's going to keep coming back at us. Oh, but look, there's better ways to do it. Oh, but there's humane ways that you can do this. We've got to keep on this, learn, educate ourselves. And this industry they're trying desperately to hold on to a dying industry, or what should be a dying industry. It's just this outdated, horrible industry that they're trying to hang on to with these soothing stories, these supposedly improved conditions. And as this book reveals, there is no humane way to commodify and kill animals, sentient living animals that don't want to die. And we can't forget them. We have to remember them. So all right, so I'm going to wrap up right now with a final quote, and this is a quote from my chapter. "We must not let the deception of new marketing eclipse the fundamental cruelty of animal agriculture."